of the Flies.
Welcome back for another analysis of Chapter 8, Lord of the Flies, Gift for the Darkness.
Ooh.
So much stuff in this chapter. I feel like Miss Watson said at one point that this is her favorite chapter.
I think it's my favorite chapter. There's some stuff at the beginning of Chapter 9 that it's just like the interactions with Simon in these chapters I just really like because it goes into the kind of more creepy parts of this book and symbolic stuff that is one of the reasons I like it so much.
I agree. I feel like the momentum picks up in this chapter and things are really starting to happen. It's really getting creepy. And with all of the Freudian psychology, I feel like we're really watching superego deteriorate and it is starting to spike.
I mean, I feel like I could have this conversation just about the paragraph where they kill the pig. There's so much in there. The way that they describe it, it's just like...
Yeah, and I feel like Piggy is starting to have a moment at the beginning of leadership at the beginning of this chapter. Just for the briefest moment, but...
yeah. So I have to admit, I just reread it this morning to kind of pick out my favorite quotes and stuff. So I feel like I'm comfortable giving a quick summary.
Okay.
So the chapter starts with Ralph. He's describing the beast, and he's like, "We can't hunt that thing. It's too big. It's too powerful for us." And then Jack kind of calls him a coward, and he tries to hold, so he blows the conch, which is the first time I think anybody other than Ralph has done that. And Ralph tries to take it from him, and he's like, "No, I called this meeting, I'm going to talk." So Jack he tries to have a vote, and he says, who thinks Ralph shouldn't be chief? And nobody raises their hand, and he's kind of embarrassed about that, and he is like, "Fine, I'm not playing with you anymore." And I personally find that use of that word play to be very interesting, that they think it's just a game. Jack is
It's
Jack,
it definitely shows, sorry to interrupt, but okay. He's doing this sort of adult thing where he's trying to overthrow the leader, but at the same time it kind of flashes back to realizing, oh yeah, they're just kids. They're playing in a way.
Reminds me of when I was a kid. One of my friends, she's still one of my best friends, but we used to play kickball all the time, and every time she would start to lose, she would be like, "I'm leaving. I'm not playing with you guys anymore," and she would take the ball and leave. Yeah. So not just that I don't want to play with you, but you guys can't play anymore either.
Kind of like a power move. Yeah. I'm going to take control.
Yeah.
Sorry, carry on.
So they have the vote, and nobody votes for Jack. He's like, so he leaves. And Simon's like, "We should go up the mountain." And the rest of them are like, "Nope, I don't think so." But they realize that if they don't go up the mountain, they don't have the fire. And Piggy's like, "We could just have a fire down here." They're like, "Oh, that's a smart choice. Okay." So they get kind of excited. They're like, "We're gonna have our own little tribe, and we're gonna build our fire down here." And everybody's excited, and they start helping out. And the little boys are dancing and singing, and they're pretty cheerful at this point. They're feeling really good without that Jack's negative vibes. So then we flip over to, they start talking about some of the kids. They realize that Bill, Roger, some of the other people went off with Jack, I think. And then Simon also has wandered off. He goes into his little private clearing that he likes. Then we kind of switch back to Jack, and he is like, "We're gonna forget about the beast and we're gonna have fun." But then immediately after he says he's gonna forget about the beast, he's like, "But we'll leave it a sacrifice. We'll kill the pig and leave it a sacrifice." And they all think this is a great idea. So then they go off to try to kill a pig, and they get her. And I'm gonna come back to talk more about this later, but she's a mom, which is super sad. So they kill the pig, and they put her head on a stick for as a gift for the dark, as a gift for the beast, gift for the darkness. So then Simon, so again, like this is, I'm going to come back to this, but so Simon is there. He sees the pig's head on a stick, and he's kind of losing it. I think he's either overheated, or I think he's got some sort of seizure disorder or something, to be honest, because it talks about like one of his times. So like he is kind of, he fainted at the beginning, so he's got some sort of physical ailment, and he's kind of hallucinating a little bit, imagining this thing. And it's like kind of talking to him at first, but then not. And then we flip back to the boys on the beach, and they get raided. So the Jack and his crew come, and they are trying to steal the fire because they need the fire to cook the pig. And they do invite the boys. They're like, "We're having a feast. You should come with us." And then I think some of them do go, because the little ones are like, yeah, meat, like that would be good. That would be good, because they did talk about a feast on the beach, but they were like just fruit, and they're like, nah, I'd rather like have this like delicious pig. And then, but Ralph's like calls himself another meeting, and at this point he's like, he's not even sure what he's trying to get them to do. He keeps forgetting. I think he's distracted by the idea of this like feast. He kind of wants to do that too, but he's like, no, we have to think about fire. We have to think about the fire. Then we flip back, and now we get back into like the Lord of, so they name the pig's head on the stick, or Simon gives it this name of the Lord of the Flies. You could imagine a dead pig's head on a stick. It's buzzing with flies that are going after this dead thing. And it's talking to him, and he's like, aren't you afraid of me? The voice, I can picture this like creepy voice. I don't know where it's coming from in my head, but like it's talking to him. It's like, it's saying, you think you know better than I do. I'm going to get mad. We're going to have fun on this island. We're going to have fun. And then he kind of passes out again. He starts seeing the head, like it says, it's expanding like a balloon. So he's having a little bit of an episode, and then he kind of passes out. That's how the chapter ends.
Mm-hmm. Awesome summary. I feel like there's so much to talk about. I think it's important to note that they all have kind of accepted at this point that there is a physical beast. And Simon's the only one who's willing to actually explore this a little further and say, hey, maybe we should go up there and check it out and see what's going on.
Right, especially like in the daylight, you know?
Yeah, and if they were to follow, it's kind of like at this point, the reader knows that there isn't actually a beast. It's really just a parachuter who has landed on the island. If they were to follow Simon and follow his lead and go check it out, then, yeah, scary. Like a dead person is a scary thing, but at least it's not a mysterious something that's tormenting them. Mm-hmm. At least now they will have faced their fears and figured it out. And so I think the real problem solving would be to follow Simon, but instead they're following Piggy. And kind of finally, Piggy has this moment of glory where he comes up with a good idea, and he's like kind of generated this excitement and cheer at the idea of creating a fire at the base of the mountain. And it's a simple solution, kind of like a Band-Aid solution. But Piggy is really excited, and there's this quote that says that Piggy is excited that he'd made a contribution to society.
It says Piggy was so full of delight and expanding liberty in Jack's departure, so full of pride in his contribution to the good of society, that he even helped to fetch the wood.
So for the first time, he's actually being helpful and going out and contributing and adding wood to the fire. And without Jack, maybe the influence of the id, like Piggy's like, yay, I can help society, and finally we're following the rules, and
and they also make sure to point out that the wood that he does get is like the closest possible branch that he can find. Like he's like, I'm gonna go help, but like just like grabs whatever's nearest to him. So I think
Yeah.
that that was kind of a funny addition to that part.
Yes. And I like the quote on 129 that says, "The greatest ideas are the simplest. Now that there was something to be done, they worked with passion." So it might not be the best idea ever, but it's something that was immediate that they could do to feel better, and they just felt glad to take action at something.
I thought that, yeah, there was a thing that I pointed out earlier. On my book, it's page 128, but I don't think it's the same in everybody else's. It's Jack's talk. I mean, Ralph is talking about the beast, and he goes, "It's like that thing squats by the fire as though it didn't want us to be rescued." So like, Jack is really become singularly focused on this fire, which makes sense. Later, um, he says something about, well, like if you were drowning and somebody offered you a rope, like you would take it, right?
Mm-hmm.
It says if a doctor said take this because if you don't take it you'll die, you mean you would, wouldn't you? I mean, of course you would. And so he's trying to be like, I don't I just legitimately do not understand why nobody else cares about this as much as I do. Like I'm trying to offer you a way to survive. We're gonna die if we stay here. And he really um, but at the same time, sometimes I feel like he's trying to convince himself, not the other boys, because later when he's having the meeting and he's like, guys, we really have to think about the fire, and Piggy's like in his ear being like, remember, we're talking about the fire, we want to be rescued. And then Ralph says, he says, the fire is the most important thing. Without the fire, we can't be rescued. I'd like to put on war paint and be a savage, but we must keep the fire burning. Fire is the most important thing on the island because and he's like, he can't even remember. He's distracted. He's like, it does seem really fun to do what he's like, that does seem fun.
Yeah.
I want to go just like goof off and kill things and be irresponsible, but I can't because I'm the leader. And I wrote in the margins like mom, like he's like feeling this like responsibility to the other boys. He's their leader. He's like, I have to save them, even if that's not the most fun thing to do.
Yeah, and that's really tough to like stay true to the responsible thing, even though it's less fun. And on page 131, I think Piggy and Ralph are realizing that more and more boys are kind of slipping away to join Jack, to join the hunters, to feast. There's this moment where they don't really want to admit it, but more and more boys are leaving. It says, we'll have to make a new list of who's to look after the fire. If you can find them. He looked round. Then, for the first time, he saw how few biggins there were and understood why the work had been so hard. Where's Maurice? Piggy wiped his glass again. I expect. No, he wouldn't go into the forest by himself, would he? Ralph jumped up, ran swiftly round the fire, and stood by Piggy, holding up his hair. But we've got to have a list. There's you and me and Sam and Eric, and he would not look at Piggy, but spoke casually. Where's Bill and Roger? Piggy leaned forward and put a fragment of wood on the fire. I expect they've gone. I expect they won't play either. And so they're realizing that there are only a few big kids left. It's mainly little uns, and a lot of people are slipping away. And I think they're too afraid to kind of acknowledge that.
Mm-hmm. One thing about that other group that I thought was interesting is like, so Jack's kind of like, I'm the leader of this group, I'm in charge, and he says, and another thing, we shan't dream so much down here, which I think is just like that he thinks he can control what they dream, because I think what he's talking about is they have made several connotations to like the little ones having nightmares, and Jack, I mean, Ralph himself has some dreams of their previous life, so I'm guessing that Jack probably has had some unpleasant dreams too, and he's like, we're not even going to we're not gonna dream, like, and I just thought that that was interesting that he thinks that, like, or he's claiming that he can, like, control that,
Mm-hmm.
but, um,
Uh,
and
so,
then,
oh, go ahead.
no, I was just gonna jump right into the pig murdering,
Oh, yeah. In
so,
between, then Simon kind of goes off into the woods, but then it jumps to the pig murdering, which is worth
mhm.
talking about for sure.
Yeah, yes, uh, and so the pig is a mom, like it's got its piglets, and they still go after it, which is pretty sad. I have brought this up, I think, before, but um, I personally take some issue with the way that William Golding treats some of the gender. So, like, I find it interesting that this pig is the only female character on the island, and she's got babies. It also says that it he takes the time. He says, or the author, I mean, says one piglet with a demented shriek rushed into the sea, trailing Roger's spear behind it. So he wants us to know that it was Roger that threw a spear at a baby. And as we remember, Roger was the one that was throwing the rocks at the little kids. So Roger was the one that went up the mountain with them. So we're maybe learning a little bit more about Roger. He's quiet, but kind of got this violent streak. So I
Because
just
it's
think that
really not about, it's not about food for him.
mm-mm, because a
But
piglet's not going to give you that much food. So I do think that it was intentional to point out that Roger threw his spear at the piglet. And then this is the part that, like, okay, so they, on page 138, they're chasing the pig, right? So they've injured her, and they're chasing her by following the trail of blood that she's leaving behind. And some of the words that they use, the afternoon wore on, hazy and dreadful with damp heat. The sow staggered her way ahead of them, bleeding and mad, and the hunters followed, wedded to her in lust, excited by the long chase and the dropped blood. So, like, interesting choices of words. They were just behind her when she staggered into an open space where bright flowers grew and butterflies danced around each other, and the air was hot and still. Now, if we remember, this is exactly as they describe the place where Simon is. So, without saying that they're going into this clearing that's like Simon's like secret, sacred, special spot, that's what's happening. And the butterflies are the signal for that to me.
mm-hmm.
The butterflies and Simon tend to go together. I think the butterflies represent this like innocence and peace almost.
Mm-hmm. And it's almost like by charging in there,
Mm-hmm.
violently chasing this sow with spears, they're kind of like corrupting
Mm-hmm.
this sweet, peaceful space.
Yeah, and we are also know that Simon's there somewhere. Like he's off in like, but I think he's passed out or something. But like he's there. So this is like, yeah, this is like the beautiful spot that, like, the very beginning they describe this with the beautiful like candle flowers, and it's where he went at night and the sunset. So it's like this spot on the island that's still being described as like this gorgeous oasis type place, and now it's like desecrated by this murder. So the next part that is kind of really gross, and I'm gonna say it anyway. They're going to kill the pig, and it says, which literally did not kind of realize this until today when I reread it. Roger ran round the heap, prodding with his spear wherever pig flesh appeared. Jack was on top of the sow, stabbing downward with his knife. Roger found a lodging for his point and began to push till he was leaning with his whole weight. The spear moved forward inch by inch, and then the terrified squealing became a high-pitched scream. Then Jack found the throat, and the hot blood spouted all over his hands. The sow collapsed under them, and they were heavy and fulfilled upon her. Ooh. So, like, they just killed it. There's blood everywhere. And then like, in the next scene, like, Jack is, like, rubbing his bloody hands on Maurice's face?
I marked that quote because I thought it was extra disturbing. On 135, it says, he giggled and flicked them while the boys laughed at his reeking palms. So there's like blood on his hands. Then Jack grabbed Maurice and rubbed the stuff over his cheeks. So they're like kind of playfully smearing blood around.
Yeah, and then they realize where Roger stuck his spear, like in the pig's butt. Like it says, it says right up her ass. So like, and I don't know how I didn't pick up on that before. Like that's, like I thought, anyway. So that's gross.
It was really a like uncivilized, not respectful way to kill an animal.
And they're all like laughing about it. They all think it's hilarious. So that's gross. And also just like, again, gives us a little bit more insight into like Roger. He's now thrown a spear at the baby, and like this is like where he's sticking his spear. So they got the pig, and they put the head on the stick as a gift, and that's where Simon says it. And then at this point, I just wanted to point out, because I brought up the butterflies before, when they're describing it, it says, even the butterflies deserted the open space where the obscene thing grinned and dripped. So now this spot where it had been this like kind of warm tropical place, there was the butterflies, they're gone. So this symbol of like the kind of quiet peace is gone, because the Lord of the Flies is there.
Yep. And in its place, a really scary description on 137. It says, the silence accepted the gift and awed them. The head remained there, dim-eyed, grinning faintly, blood blackening between the teeth. All at once they were running away as fast as they could through the forest toward the open beach. So they leave it there, and they kind of frightened themselves, maybe, by this scary pig head on a stick.
Another thing that I wanted to point out is that there's a couple times where they are describing the heat and this like oppressive heat and the weather. There were up there for once were clouds, great bulging towers that sprouted over the island. Later it says, high up among the bulging clouds, thunder went off like a gun. So it's starting to, there's storminess. And I think, and I might be wrong about this, but when they first crashed, there was a storm. A storm had like brought in, they talk about this storm, and it hasn't happened since. And I think that what this is trying to represent is passage of time, and I think it's been a year. I want to say like a year. I don't know if that's overestimating.
Well, that would be interesting, because it's like, thunderstorms tend to come like during a season of the year.
Right. I think that it's describing the season is now coming back. And it's now rainy season again, which would seem to me to indicate maybe a full year has passed since they've
That's a good point.
been there.
I never thought about that before.
But I don't know. But I think that, just like a lot of things in the story, I think that this is intentional, whether it's trying to represent the passage of time or just the more symbolic nature of what a storm means, right? A storm is coming. That's it's foreboding. It's a little bit scary, right? So the thunder is coming. So it could be either. But
even the calm before the storm, it's kind of like, we all know that pre-thunderstorm feeling in the middle of the summer, where it's kind of like you can feel it coming. And so I guess the last part to talk about before we wrap up is the part where Simon is hallucinating. And he's seeing this pig head on a stick, and it's sort of talking to him in his imagination. But the message that this pig's head on a stick is giving is, and I'll quote on page 143, the Lord of the Flies says, "Fancy thinking the beast was something you could hunt and kill," said the head. For a moment or two, the forest and all the other dimly appreciated places echoed with the parody of laughter. "You knew, didn't you? I'm part of you. Close, close, close. I'm the reason why it's no go, why things are what they are. And I think this part is really confusing and deserves some conversation. The way I kind of think about it is the Lord of the Flies is Simon's own kind of consciousness, and Simon knows what all the other boys have failed to recognize, that the beast isn't a thing. The beast is within all of themselves. I think this is where the author is trying to make the point that humans at their core are kind of savages and do bad things when they're left to their own devices. I don't agree with this. I feel like humans actually tend to do good things, and I actually have a good article to bring at the end of this unit about a real group of boys.
Yes.
There's a real group of boys who were stranded on an island, and they didn't do bad things to each other. They actually ended up surviving and like helping each other.
Yeah, and I read a commentary on that was like about kind of cultural differences and like how, William Golding is trying to say that this is like all human nature, and like people are like, no, this just is like white British boys like that would do this. And he's asking if they made a rule not to argue. The real boys, or I don't know. I haven't actually read it.
The real boys in the article that I read, I think they did have a rule not to argue, and they did keep a fire going the entire time that they were there, which was over a year. I want to say they were there for 18 months.
Yeah.
They kept the fire going the entire time, and they kept each other in check by having time out. They had like a self-enforced timeout policy.
Yeah, so
we're kind of straying away. I'll put that article on Google Classroom, but yeah, I think William Golding's trying to say like, oh, humans have this essential illness, in quotes, that left to their own devices, they will do bad things and be unkind and violent.
Yeah. Caroline, I don't know if they knew. I don't think they knew each other, most of them, because I remember in the first couple chapters they said like they had to collect names, and Piggy and Ralph had to introduce themselves to each other in the beginning. I do think some of them did because there was the choir, right? Jack started as the leader of this choir, and they were all wearing those uniforms. So my guess is that they came from the same place. I think that what had happened is that they were all boarding school kids who were being evacuated from their schools because of the war. So some of them might have known each other and been from the same school, as we know from the choir boys. But I think in general they do not know each other. And yeah, so, but I do think it would be fascinating to do like I think a Lord of the Flies like prequel would be fascinating to see like what these boys were like before they got to the island. But anyway, yeah, I don't think they knew each other for the most part.
Yeah, I suppose just for the sake of time, we could move to Q&A. If anyone else has questions about the chapter, or that was a good question from Gabriel.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I'm just looking. I think it's interesting that the beast, the Lord of the Flies, is telling Simon, he's like, I'm the beast, but the actual pig's head is supposed to be like originally it was like a gift for the beast, but it almost shows that they're the ones creating the beast, right? They created this ugly, gross thing that they're saying is a sacrifice, but it itself is a beast, right? So it's like, it's showing us that they're, this is a man-made,
in their own imagination.
Yeah, human-created beast. It's all in their heads. So, any questions, comments? I do think that Simon it does say like his eyes were half closed. He knew that one of his times was coming on. So he's got this like mysterious illness where he's like fainting all the time.
It makes me wonder if it's like epilepsy,
right? Or I think it's like a seizure.
Some sort of fainting. disorder.
And because I think like he describes seeing the pig's head like expanding like a balloon, and I think there is something that like what people with seizures, like it's like there's that size distortion and stuff that comes on before a seizure, you can kind of tell. Or even like migraines. So sometimes with migraines you get this like sensitivity to light, you get these like kind of distorted things, so it could be something like that too. But
yeah, that's a good point.
I think
But at the very beginning of the book, he faints too, so we know that that's happened to him before.
And I think that, yeah, that there is trying to be some sort of explanation for what's going on. I also think he's probably like dehydrated.
Yeah, like, no one's been filling those coconut shells.
And it describes his like sweaty hair a lot. So anyway.
Yeah.
Okay.